welcome to Talking Absolute Worship. For the next under an hour, we will be talking absolute worship about the lectionary passages and how they might inspire our preaching and our worship leading this coming week. So, Rachel, how have you been inspired this week?
Well, the couple of things that kind of I wrote at the top of my piece of paper, which is where I usually begin. I wrote about making choices and the question, how will you respond to Jesus? But then the verse that really got stuck in my mind from the John reading was towards the end, where it talks about things coming and going between heaven and earth. And I kind of got that idea of coming and going between heaven and earth stuck in my mind. I'm paraphrasing, obviously it's something like ascending and descending. But I was thinking about that idea of occupying two spaces and how we're called to be people who kind of travel between those two spaces. I mean, some people say that, you know, we're that as Christians we're kind of, you know, citizens of a land that we won't ever get to until we're dead, kind of thing. And I kind of understand what they're saying, but I don't really go along with it wholeheartedly, because I think that we're also called to live here and to be kind of proper human beings as well. So I do feel that tension of being kind of in two worlds, really, and coming and going between them. Sometimes I'm perhaps more down to earth, and sometimes I'm perhaps off in my own little, you know, spiritual bubble, perhaps. So I felt that idea picked up on, I didn't like the Corinthians reading, generally speaking, but there was a line at the end of it that said, glorify God in your body. And I read a great thing in a commentary about that verse that said, to glorify God in your body is to accept the world as the arena for discipleship. It's to acknowledge the marketplace, the home, the voting booth, the classroom as places where the worldly worship of God takes place. So so I like that idea of being somehow in between us, where we're kind of we do live here. We also are, you know, part resident in this other world, and that we, in all that we do, try to bring those things together as far as we can. So they were that was my main train of thought.
Ruth.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I love that quote about, you know, in your body, meaning, you know, in your bodily life, I suppose, in all the ways. I took that much more literally about thinking about meditation as a way of attending to what's happening in your body. And thinking about your breathing and the position of your body and all the things that you do in meditation, whether it's meditation, Christian meditation. And yet, when I started thinking of that, I realized that isn't just an inward looking thing, because as you learn to still, you know, your busy mind, you're actually more open to things. And I use an app, Headspace app on my phone every now and again, not as often as I should probably. And it helps me still the kind of buzzing wheel in my head. And one of the things is, you know, listen to the sounds around you and become aware of, and without wanting to sound too fluffy, it kind of, I've become more aware of the world, not less aware. So it's not kind of a turning in, it's almost a kind of a calming down so that you can actually look out. And I think that concept of glorifying God in your body and that not being, oh well, this is a personal thing then, to being something that opens you out. So I think that feels to resonate a bit with me.
Thank you. That does help me, both of you, take something at least from this Corinthians passage, because I kind of started off thinking that I would merely suggest that preachers reflect carefully on whether they really think their congregation at this particular point in their lives need to be admonished for fornication and consorting with prostitutes. And it sounded to me to be all about misusing the body and therefore spoiling it and corrupting it. And I kind of like thinking of my congregation. I remember when I was training, being linked to a little church in Cumnor outside Oxford. There was a very elderly congregation who only got more elderly as I was there. And I remember a visiting student preacher coming to preach about possibly even this passage, railing about fornication and adultery. And I did kind of look sideways around the congregation and discerned that most of them were thinking, chance will be a fine thing, young man. Those days are past. But thank you for that, because that helps me focus on a different part of it, and it's really helpful. Lithan.
I did write next to the 1 Corinthians reading, just no. Just, I'm not going to go there. But actually, thinking about what you just said, Phil, Paul likes lists of things like fornication and adultery and witchcraft. So you get quite a lot of those lists. And this one isn't as good, but I think, should I have run out of everything else and be using the Corinthians reading, I might point to some of the other lists that start off with things like fornication and witchcraft. You go, oh, well, I'd never do that. But they end up with things like being angry and criticizing people. And actually, Paul thinks that those things are no better than the ones that we might go, the big ones. And you can sit there with your hands, go, oh, I wouldn't do that. But actually, although he's pointed to this time, and there are so many things that we can do to misuse and harm our bodies, that might be overeating chocolate, or having too many sherries, or there may be other things that people do that are the deepest secrets of their life that they're not going to share, that they'll still do no matter how old they are. And I think maybe you can take the little list from Corinthians, possibly sprinkle in some of the other things, and then say, well, it could apply to other ways that we don't look after our bodies in the right way and misuse them.
Yeah, Ruth.
But just thinking, I think it's about taking incarnation seriously, isn't it? And not just the incarnation of Jesus. This is a bit of an echo of the discussion last week about the baptism of Jesus. It's not just about the baptism of Jesus, but about our baptism. I think Paul is trying to say things about the incarnation of Jesus also being about our incarnation. And going back to Rachel's thing about moving between heaven and earth, that we're used to the idea that Jesus moves between heaven and earth, from heaven to earth and back to heaven, but the thought that it's more fluid than that. It's more of a constant movement, that we are both a little lower than the angels and made of dust. So it's how we do those things, so that what we do in our bodies matters in our discipleship of Jesus. We can't just say, well, yeah, I'm grumpy and unsmiling and unpleasant, but I love Jesus. It has to show in your body and be expressed in your body. And I think that's what Paul's getting at. But
yeah, it's avoiding dualism, isn't it? And rejecting the body and trying to project a purely spiritual understanding of Christian faith. I do like Rachel's in-betweeners, leaving aside the television show, the in-betweeners, but they're in between two different things, but they're growing into something and leaving behind something. I quite like Paul's language, which is similar, that he uses in other places about being ambassadors, without the Ferrero Rocher, but being ambassadors from one kingdom to another. And that's kind of the same idea about being sort of going between heaven and earth. And I've often found that to be really powerful kind of imagery. Yeah, Ruth.
Just with apologies to Rachel, who doesn't come from a URC background, but we've got the bit in the statement containing the nature, faith and order of the URC that we are servants of the world, while citizens of God's eternal kingdom. And I just think it's one of the cracking bits of what could feel like a dry kind of statement. It's actually, I think, is wonderful poetry written by Alan Gaunt, who was a minister, but it's great poetry that explains exactly that sense of the go-betweens, the people who are absolutely both, and we have to remember that.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, great start, Rachel. Where not that I'm here to judge who's making a great contribution. Lithan, where are you going with these readings?
Yeah, well, I'm going with the John reading because I tend to just pick the one, although there are echoes in what I say that could be in the Samuel reading, so you could use some of it for that. But I think what struck me most was, can anything good come out of Nazareth? Said under the fig tree, and then Jesus going, I saw you under the fig tree, and Nathanael going, what happened? And that, so there are several things. I'm not sure which order I do them in, but that kind of, can anything good come out of Nazareth, might be a time to reflect on how do people view the place that you're in, the community you're in. It could just be the church, but where I am, it would be the community. And where we are, the villagers around don't like us very much because we've taken up beautiful fields and turned it into housing. And I think there's a good thing about thinking about what does it mean to judge people by where they live, which is what Nathaniel's doing there. But then for him to be blindsided by Jesus, and Jesus not being put off by Nathaniel's view of him to start with. And I think we so easily are afraid of people being sarcastic or judging us before they've met us. And Jesus isn't put off by that. He finds that way to connect with Nathaniel and bring him into discipleship. And Jesus notices and listens and isn't put off. And it might be a time then to have an exercise in listening, where you put your congregation in twos. This works better if you don't have lots of people with hearing aids. Now I've got hearing aids, I'm aware of the need for spreading people out. But if you've got lots of people without, then you can put them into twos and have one person talk while the other's trying to put them off, and then have it where one's really listening to the other and not being put off at all, and being heard, and the value of that. And I think so I suppose it's about the value of being seen and heard. So Jesus is then seen for what he is, and Nathaniel's seen for who he is. And Jesus is able to hear Nathaniel's need underneath the scorn and bring him into a new relationship with God. And that Jesus knows Nathaniel and knows what's really there and isn't put off, then links into the Psalm 139, which is just amazing. So any chance to use that and just kind of read it and not comment on it and just say, this is about you, is fantastic. And I always love the idea of baby scans. When we first had the baby scan, and thinking, these days we can see babies being knit together in their mother's womb, but up until, I don't know, I guess we were some of the early parents to get scans. I'm not sure how early they were before the 1980s or 1990s. People never did, but God always knew what we were like as we were knitted together. And I just love that feeling of God knowing us and loving us, even when we were a tiny wee thing. So that's some of my ramblings for Sunday.
And I sometimes think, do you think God's as equally excited to see those early scans as we are when we go, wow, look at that little tiny feet?
I suppose I'd say with that, when I was first pregnant in the olden days, when you had lots of hospital visits, we for some reason had to go to the hospital for our first antenatal to see a doctor, and I was only about 9-10 weeks pregnant, something like that, and we had a really junior doctor who obviously hadn't done this before, and he said, you could have a scan. Do you want to have a scan? So we went, yeah, we'll have a scan. And he was so excited, and he's, look, it's your baby. And I was just thinking of that's what God's like, going, wow, there it is, look.
Ruth.
I didn't think of this at all when I was reading it, but when you said about Nathaniel judging Jesus on where he came from, and Jesus saying to Nathaniel, I saw you under the fig tree, I think I've always thought of that as a kind of, Jesus saying, oh, you've got more here than you think, because I know stuff. But as you said it, I thought fig tree, I mean, it could be as simple as he was under the fig tree and Jesus saw him under the fig tree. So there may be absolutely nothing in this. But I did think, what about the symbolism of a fig tree? And what if Jesus is saying to Nathaniel, you're judging me because of Nazareth, but I'm judging you because you were under a fig tree, and that a fig tree is that figure of judgment, the whole good figs, bad figs. We've got the cursing of the fig tree. There's all sorts of things happening with fig trees. Fig leaves are what Adam and Eve used to cover themselves up. I think there's all sorts of symbolism about a fig tree. And I just quickly did a quick thing on BiblePlaces.com, says that the fig tree is an image of prosperity and judgment. And so I just thought for a fleeting moment, maybe Jesus was saying that, don't be judging on signs of prosperity because, I saw you under a fig tree, so I could judge you because of that, and I'm not going to. But that could be the sort of sermon idea that you go, that's really interesting and has absolutely nothing to say to anybody else at all. Now screw it up and throw it away. but it just toddled through my head, so I just thought I'd say it.
Yeah, Rachel.
I was just struck with something that Lithin said about kind of Jesus knowing stuff but not using that in judgment. And I was just thinking about the number of times that we all probably get people maybe shouting at us or being cross with us, and it appears that it's about us, but often it's about something that's going on with them, and it's just that whole ability, I suppose, to maybe take a step back and think what's going on, and not to just kind of jump in with your gut reaction and, well, I'm really upset because you've said this, or to start, defending yourself or berating them or whatever it is that we might do. But that sort of taking a step back and counting to 10, and again, it's probably something that you'd not make a sermon out of at all, but it just popped into my mind when both Lithin and Ruth were talking about that judgment idea.
But you clearly noticed, Ruth, which has given you a subliminal message, that behind me is a fig tree there. You saw me under the fig tree. There's a fig tree there. Because I too picked up on this fig thing. I've always been a little bit puzzled by this. Yeah, I saw you under the fig tree, as if that's like a big deal. It's like saying, yeah, I saw you at the bus stop. Oh, you must be the Messiah. It's always sounded like a bit like a non sequitur to me, that he's so amazed that Jesus had seen him under the fig tree. There must be more to it than that. But I did get stuck on the fig tree, and I, like you, looked up the fig tree. It is all those things that you say it is. And I did muse upon the idea of going off on a sort of big soul track of tracing fig tree imagery through the Bible. As you say, there's the Genesis fig leaf. It's kind of a symbol of nakedness and shame, but also a symbol that you can't hide anything from God. However much you've got to hide, the fig leaf doesn't really do it, to put that delicately, which kind of links into Psalm 39 quite neatly, about God knowing us and seeing us, and before we even know what we're doing, God knows. which is supposed to be a comforting image. Some people don't find it that comforting to know that God is so all-knowing. In Deuteronomy, this is what you were alluding to. The promised land is described as a land of wheat and barley, of vines and fig trees and pomegranates, of oil, olive oil and honey. A land where you'll eat food without scarcity. It's a symbol of God's generous provision. And of course, there are the references. There's the cursed fig tree, and there's the fig tree where your farmer wants to dig some more around it and give it a chance. And then there's the Jesus talking about the fig tree with the buds showing, which is a sign of hope, which is why I bought this one up behind me, because my fig tree got buds coming on it, and it's got figs as well. So Jesus ain't cursing this one. It's got buds on it as a sign of hope for the future. I don't know if there's anything in that, but I reckon there is. If you were to take those images alongside each other and take the symbolism of each one, you could chart some kind of symbolic journey through people's lives, and it links in with these readings. Maybe not quite so much with Philip, but certainly with Psalm 39, I think. Which, interesting though, I think you said you love that, and just read it without comment.
Yeah, apart from the end.
The end.
I'd leave out the last bit.
Yeah, I think that's interesting though. It's an interesting choice, isn't it? The lectionary always leaves it off. There's so many lovely words. You know everything about me, God, and then if only you would slay the wicked, and all that kind of
Dash the
stuff.
brains out of babies.
Oh, it doesn't. That's not this one, but that's another psalm. Says the baby dashing. But
Right.
slay
the
the
rivers
wicked.
of Babylon with the baby dashing.
Oh, right. Yeah, I know that's the other one that's lovely. And then you get,
I hate those who hate you, and then it goes on, and then it finishes. Search me, O God, and know my heart. See if there is any evil within me. I think, hang on, you've just said that. What? It doesn't take. You don't need to look far to find that. And I just think that's really interesting. What we do with that. So well, it's best just to leave it off, because without it, it's quite nice. I don't know. People make their own choices with that one. The lectionary, strictly speaking, leaves it out. So you're allowed to. But it is there. If someone goes and looks it up for themselves and they go, hang on. I wasn't expecting this bit. Right, Ruth, where are you going with these, apart from figs?
Yes, which was a side order of figs. But the I promised you bookends last week. I said that, you know, for me, these 2 weeks of last week and this week kind of bookend a bit. So last week we were thinking about the voice of God and what God might be trying to say to us. And for this one, and I didn't kind of look for a theme, but it just leapt out at me, of where and how do we encounter God. So in the 4 themes, the call of Samuel, I will come back to that one because I thought that was worth looking at in a bit more detail. The psalm, you know, we've already talked about God's utter knowing of us and God being kind of everywhere, before us, behind us, and all of that. The 1 Corinthians, as we've just been saying, the glorifying God in your body. So the idea that God is present in the stuff of our bodies and the stuff of our lives. And then Jesus calls Philip, and Philip calls Nathaniel. So sometimes we find God in others, other people speak to us of the things of God, and that's how we encounter it. But going back to Samuel for a minute, I think I kind of read it and thought, oh, it's the call of Samuel again, because it is one of those stories that, you know, most of us have probably known for a very long time, and it's a great story. But then I remembered and I think and others who remember John Muddyford I've said Muddyford and then I don't mean it, Muddyman. I've been in the Southwest too long. His thing about biblical references was that you have to pay attention to 3 things: context, context, and context. So the context in which something was written, the context in which it's set in the Bible, you know, the passages either side, and then the context into which we're hearing it. That's it really. That's my theory of preaching right there in one sort of lesson. It was a really good thing to learn. But that made me look at what came before the call of Samuel, and also to think about why are we getting this story, this very memorable story about little Samuel lying down and all of that, which we trot out in Sunday schools and things like that. And I thought, well, the context was, I think, trying to understand, well, why Samuel? That we had Eli and his sons, and they're the priestly order, and it goes from father to son, and that's how it happens. And then Samuel, out of nowhere, pops up, and suddenly we're off on a different track. So it's trying to explain, oh, God wanted this to happen, so this is how it happens. And then looking at the rest of the story, the call of Samuel doesn't just come out of the blue, because when you look back in chapter 1, you have all the stuff about Hannah coming to the temple and praying for a child and promising the child to God. Again, that kind of explanatory, this is how he ends up in the temple kind of stuff. But also, I was stuff that I'd never really particularly noticed before. In chapter 2, there's that wonderful prayer of Hannah, which kind of echoes the Magnificat. And I think I've always read that bit and stopped there because it's really good. But it then goes on in chapter 2, verse 18, it talks about Samuel ministering before the Lord. So it's not like nothing happens to Samuel till this call. Samuel's toddling around and ministering and doing his stuff in the temple. He's not just living there waiting for God to speak to him. He's busy doing stuff. And then similarly in chapter 2, verse 26, the boy Samuel continued to grow in stature and in favour with the Lord and the people. So this child lying down to sleep that God speaks to has a whole story of prayers and ministry and being in the temple and people's regard for him before God speaks. So I thought there was something there about getting away from the Cecil B. DeMille kind of God speaking out of absolutely nowhere and seeing God patiently kind of laying the foundation and speaking in all sorts of different ways into the life of Samuel. And if you just take the snapshot of the story of Samuel and Eli and all that, it's a great story, but that's only that little bit, and the whole story is much more. So I thought there's something here for me about us encountering God in a myriad of ways and not getting hung up on one little snapshot, but trying to get the wider picture, and then being aware of the ways in which God is speaking, the different ways in which we encounter God. So I then kind of remembered Rowan Williams, because I wanted to get away from, I think what I don't want to say in this sermon, whatever it ends up looking like, is something about, so how we encounter God's really important. I want that to be an impetus to drive people, out to think about how they then serve God and serve people. So I remembered half remembered the Rowan Williams quote about mission is finding out what God is doing and joining in. So once we are sensitive to the myriad ways in which we encounter God, we become part of that story. So we might be the Philip to somebody's Nathaniel, we might be the Eli to somebody's Samuel, we might be, the one who calls out about, sings the song of the psalmist about how God is everywhere. And hopefully we are the ones who in our bodies embody the Holy Spirit so that people see God at work.
Wow, there's tons in there. Rachel.
Sorry, big.
And I think as you've been speaking, it sort of struck me that fits into my kind of coming and going idea, because you've got Samuel quite literally coming and going, haven't you? When he keeps going in to wake up Eli, and that whole kind of carrying messages, I suppose, but more than that. And yeah, I'm just overwhelmed by that kind of idea about I don't know, something transformative about being a message bearer, isn't there? Yeah. Sorry, I'm going all tingly after. I'll be thinking about that all day now.
As will all our listeners and viewers, I'm sure. Ruth makes
You cut that bit.
I've always taken that sort of like thing with Samuel hearing and running off to Eli several times as like a comforting thing to reassure me that it's not just me that is a bit dense, and God needs several goes before I hear what it is God wants me to do, or even realize that it is God who's speaking. I don't think I've ever really been a, oh yeah, I get it straight away thing, and God has to try 20 or 30 different subtle approaches before realizing that subtlety isn't going to do it with me. And I think what Ruth says helps me a bit with that, because it wasn't just the 3 times or however many times he was called in the night by this mysterious voice. It was his mother. It was her coming to visit every year. Presumably she went to visit him, didn't she, to see how he was doing. She must have said stuff when she went, so there must have been stuff going on all around him for all of this time. So I think that's a really helpful approach. I also found myself a little bit stuck on thinking about last week and thinking about this week, and Ruth just saying you could be the Philip to Nathaniel or something. That last week we were talking about John the Baptist, and John the Baptist was basically announcing his successor. And Eli is doing the same here. And for both of them, you'd imagine that would be quite a painful thing. Eli basically has to say, yeah, God's saying something here. Now I'm going to have to confirm it, that I'm out and my family is out. And John the Baptist the same, having to say, God's doing something new and it doesn't include me in the same way as it used to. And it kind of got me to thinking, and maybe this is being over dramatic, whether as, if you like, people who have very much represented and lived within the church as it is today and has been for decades, whether maybe we might find ourselves pointing to what's coming and it's totally beyond us. It's something completely different to what we have always imagined it to be. And will we resist that? Or will we, like Eli and John the Baptist, say, the thing that is coming is what God wants and I am nothing in the grand picture? I suspect I won't be as gracious. I'll say, yeah, but hang on, my stuff's still good. Yeah, Rachel.
Just thinking about Donald Trump. I don't need to say anything else.
Yeah, graciously, well, by the time that this is published, he'd probably still be in the White House. I heard today that, and we're recording this in November, November the 12th, just in case history has shown us to have egg on our faces. But he is appointing, or as he's interviewing people for jobs in his new government for the next term. He's shortlisting people and interviewing people. What must that interview sound like? It's just staggering. So yeah, he's very much the anti-Eli and the anti-John the Baptist figure in this scenario. So yeah, if I wasn't doing figs, I think I might have a go at that, although I'm not quite sure exactly where that ends up, apart from with us out of a job. So maybe I'll hold fire on that one. Adapt or change, yeah, or something like that. Okay, so we also spent some time talking. Ruth, you've got an
Sorry, just a follow-on thought from what you were just saying, that I think sometimes I find myself saying about ministry that a lot of it is trying not to get in the way of what God is trying to do. And you know, I think, you know, Rowan Williams, because he's a godly, wonderful person, talks about it, seeing what God's doing and joining in. But I think there is just that, see what God's doing and get out the way. And I think sometimes we've got to be ready to recognize that's not for me. That doesn't mean it shouldn't happen. That means I've just got to get out the way and let God and the church get on with it. Just looking forward to retirement, that's all.
I'll be happy to get out of the way. No, but I mean, as you would expect with Rowan Williams, that is really insightful, isn't it? where is it that we're actually getting in the way when we actually think we're joining in? It's that brings you up, doesn't it? That really brings you up quite smartly. Well, it brings me up anyway. Okay. As regards the rest of worship, how these readings might inspire us in the whole experience of worship. Where are we going with that, Rachel? What have you found?
Well, I didn't have a massive amount of stuff coming to mind. I was sort of struck with the whole idea about Jesus knowing stuff. And I was wondering if there's some game that you could get people engaged in, maybe, you know, who's done this or who's done this kind of game, or maybe get people to think about the things that this might all backfire actually, if you got people to think about, not to disclose, but to just personally think about the things that they wouldn't want anyone else to know, because then that whole idea about God knowing everything might make the rest of the service completely horrific. So maybe not quite such a good idea. And maybe something visual. I know it's not in any of the readings, but this idea of like coming and going and ascending and descending, it's straight away into Jacob's ladder territory. So I wondered if you could do something visual with a kind of like ladder thing. But again, I haven't really come up with any brilliant ideas about it. They're just the things that are loitering in the background.
Ladders are great, and the step ladders and stuff, they do add sort of height to the normal flow of a service. I remember I did a whole like monologue story once about Zacchaeus in the tree, and I went up a step ladder to go up the tree, and I sat at the top of the step ladder, and then I pretended to be Zacchaeus just telling the story, and then I went to come down, but I was stuck in the top of the ladder because I'd sat and wedged myself into the top of the ladder. So yeah, be careful with the ladders. But it does add a whole dimension of height and movement that I think would be really creative. Ruth?
I just wonder whether an adaptation of the thinking about things you wouldn't want people to know, given that most of the people that we're all talking to are likely to have some British sensibilities about we would never blow our own trumpet, that you could invite them to write the thing about themselves that, you know, they're most kind of proud of, but you're not going to share it with anybody, but you're just going to keep it there and then remind them, and God knows that. And maybe that's just a positive spin on that idea of, you know, I have this terrible secret, you know, I have this little burning thing that I'm far too British to tell anybody about.
I like that.
I think it's fascinating how people see this stuff, because in the modern world, and even back into the 20th century, in the olden days, people very much see this Big Brother as a bad thing, don't they? Since Orwell and everything else, and Big Brother is watching you and knowing all about you, and the state knows, and the deep state, and we don't want to give our data, although we do, is a bad thing. Whereas the psalmist appears to have seen it as a really totally comforting thing. And I think it's maybe about something about what we believe will be done with that information, isn't it? And to say that God knows everything is not the same as saying that Dominic Cummings knows everything, because he's harvested your information or something. They're very different kinds of statement, aren't they? And I think it's fascinating how that actually plays with a congregation nowadays. When you read something like Psalm 39, is it comforting? And if it's not comforting, how do we preempt that by saying something about who God is before we read the psalm? Yeah, Ruth.
I'm just reminded that I've read a few things about privacy in you know, I mean, biblical times, of course, covers a whole area, but the bit about when Jesus says, you know, go to your room in private and pray, that's quite an alien concept in the culture of the Middle East then, and quite likely lots of the Middle East now, the idea of having your own private space, whereas we value our privacy and don't want our privacy intruded on. And so I wonder, there's something about privacy and intimacy, isn't there? I think that we all appreciate the intimate space where we can be ourselves and go, you know, and take your shoes off, or whatever your metaphor is for that moment when you breathe out. And I think that's what the psalmist wants us to have that feeling of, you know, how wonderful that we can be at home with God. But privacy has a kind of a different edge for us today. So yeah, there's something to be unpacked and understood. And I don't know how, you know, it's finding the language or the ways of worshipping to help people to appreciate that as the good, warm, enveloping intimacy, rather than the intrusive, judging invasion of privacy.
I think if you could rewrite Psalm 23 in the other way around language, which says, God is the place where I can completely be myself, or God is the only place where I can completely be myself. So it's not really about God knowing everything. It's about me being comfortable being who I am in God's presence. Then I suspect people might warm to that more than the kind of God knows everything about you before you've even thought it. That kind of sounds a bit of a threat. I'm not going to rewrite Psalm 39 though. So there you go.
139.
Yes, that's what I meant. Rachel.
I think you should rewrite it, actually, because I think that I do like that idea about being at home, and that kind of fits into what I was trying to say earlier about, you know, having like two, you know, dwelling places, sort of moving comfortably between the two, and not being a kind of not always being one against the other, but kind of, yeah, being at home in both, like that.
Okay, I'm not sure how to rewrite the bits about killing everyone though, but there you go.
Take them out.
All my enemies. I suppose that is part of who we are, though, isn't it? It's you know, am I comfortable with the thoughts that I have that are not worthy ones? Maybe, I don't know. Even maybe that helps with that bit. You know, so even the bits about me that I'm not really comfortable with, I can feel more comfortable within God's presence, because I know they're not going to be used against me in the same way as they might be in other places. I don't know. I'm just rambling. Nathan, where are you going with these readings and the rest of worship opportunities?
A couple of ideas. One was, I thought about getting people to listen to sounds, which has reminded me that I've lent our CD of Listening Lottery, which is a game we played with our kids, and I still got to somebody, but where, you know, you listen to sounds and then you identify them. But I thought, actually, this is more like talking about Phil's mum's cochlear implant, because when she had her cochlear implant put in, she could hear sounds she hadn't heard for a long time, but they made no sense until sense was made of them. So she would have to hear her dog's bark and have someone say, that's spice, that's spell, that's spin, or whatever one she has now. And then she would know what that sound was. Or she'd have to open and shut cupboard doors. And in doing that, she would know that was the sound of cupboard doors. And in a sense, that's what Eli is doing for Samuel. He's the one that's able to help him make sense of the sounds that he's hearing. And sometimes we needed to do that. And you could possibly stretch it to what happens for Nathaniel as well, that Philip's the one that's able to says, come and see, and translate what you've heard into the truth. But that is a bit of a stretch there. And then I found I'm going to share screen. Paintings were a little bit disappointing this time, because they're mostly just of people pointing to Jesus. But I found, I'm not going to show you that now. Oh, stop doing that. this made me smile. So this person has done how to do cartoons of all of the different disciples or apostles. And one of the things here is that Bartholomew is also the name given to Nathaniel sometimes, but actually, although he's got two names, we very rarely hear anything else about him at all, apart from the fact he's one of the 12. So he kind of disappears into the homogenous group. And I think I might have said before, it's always a bit of a quiz. How many disciples can you name? And I never manage all 12. I always leave out Dopey or Sleepy or one of them. But I quite like this idea where it goes, what should he look like? Tired, soulful eyes, no cheekbones, large nose, rounded chin, scraggy beard, and all the different ways you could have him.
He's only got one eye.
Yes.
I know.
I'm finding that creepy.
I think that's the guy's style, but just that sense of he disappears into the story, but God knows exactly who he is, and he's more than the sum of his parts. He's not just a rounded chin and no cheekbones and one mysterious eye. There's more to him, and there is to us. We're not just a cartoon. We are fully rounded, fully known by God person. And then, oh yes, and then I just loved this. I just loved this picture of Nathaniel going, "How can anything good come out of Nazareth?" and he's on. There's almost a ladder next to him. I don't know what that white thing is, but yeah, that just made me smile as a picture to reflect on.
Was that a northern accent there, Lithan?
It was my. You do it. When you or Ruth do it instead.
It wasn't bad.
He looks like he's from Yorkshire, doesn't he?
They're all from Yorkshire, yeah, but he might have offended many of our listeners.
Like Ruth. Anyway, or any other places, or probably from the southwest. Actually, there's quite a lot of farmers who would do that. But and I think, how often do we do that? And we go, well, I'm not listening to them because they're from, but you know, he's a conservative, or he's from Nigeria, or this person, what do they think they know about so and so? And so often we take on this pose and we stop listening, or we see other people doing that and we could just go, well, suit yourself then, and walk away. But neither Philip nor Jesus does that. They bring him along and help him have a completely different kind of fulfilled life.
Cool. So yeah, that's fantastic. Ruth. Oh, Rachel, you've got something to add.
I was just going to say, I did a little Google icon search for Nathaniel, and you get him really kind of quite groomed, actually, with a neatly trimmed beard and, you know, nice hair, and he's standing in a kind of catalogue pose, holding what appears to be a scroll quite often. So I wasn't sure of the significance of all of that, but yeah, not quite like the scruffy one that that Lithan showed us.
Ruth, where are you going with these?
I'm going to try and share my screen. I mean, like Lithan, I love most of Psalm 139, and there is a version in Rejoice and Sing. But while I was looking for that, I came across something else, which is to the tune of Highland Cathedral, which I didn't know until somebody chose it on Desert Island Discs. I mean, probably 15 years ago, or you know, I haven't bothered to go on the Radio 4 website to find out who might have chosen it. And it's the most beautiful tune. I was listening to Desert Island Discs. I must have been on my way to lead worship Sunday morning, and I heard this tune for the first time and thought, oh, somebody should write a hymn to that tune because it's so wonderful. And they have. And it's Psalm 139. And this isn't a great recording, but I thought, you know, you could probably get the organ music and you could certainly get the words. And I'd love to hear a really good rendition of it, because it's the most wonderful soaring tune, and I'm starting partway through because I think they just repeat the first bit of Psalm 139 twice in this recording, and I judged that the second half was a bit better than the first half. Plus the pictures are of the choir singing, whereas the first half they kind of look around the church, so there's lots of people sitting. In fact, the person leading the worship sort of sitting down and being ready to do the next bit while the choir are burbling away in the distance. So I thought we wouldn't have that. So that's all to cover me while I press the right buttons to share computer sound. You would like that, I'm sure. And here we go. I just thought it's lovely music. But I also love that when they go to the picture of the congregation, you see the people coming in late.
They just about got in there before the intro.
Yeah, it's fabulous. It reminds me that being one of a biggish family, that getting to church on time was always a bit of an issue. And I think I was about 12 before I realised anything happened before the first hymn, because we always went in during the first hymn. So, well, my parents are no longer alive, so they can't be criticised for that. But getting us all to church on time was a very difficult thing. And so my heart went out to the quick shoving the kids in the pew while the choir are doing the intro. But I just thought, as I say, it's not the best rendition probably, but it's quite a nice match of words and music, and it's music that always makes my heart soar.
They were unusually fortunate that the back pew wasn't already crammed. So, Rachel.
I was just going to say, you could imagine that they were kind of thinking, oh, phew, it's a hymn, we can sneak in and no one will know, and then everyone's watching. But the other hymn that I do like on that psalm is the Bernadette Farrell one, "Oh God, you search me and you know me," which I don't know if you know it, but it's a very lovely tune, very lovely words.
Is that the one that goes do 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 do?
Yeah.
Yeah, something like that. I couldn't do line 2, but I also quite like the tune that Sin Rejoice and Sing for "You Are Before Me." But it's not easy for congregations to sing. It's a tricky one, isn't it? Yeah. I've got a couple of pictures. Right. Okay. Yeah. There we are. Were I going for my total fig theme, then we would be creative and we would have fig rolls, and that would be our biscuits for after the service, as worship extends into sharing tea and coffee, does it not? Yes. So if I was doing figs, we'd have, apparently you can make your own fig rolls. Paul Hollywood of Bake Off fame, I think, did have a fig roll round on Bake Off. So many of the congregation will know how to make fig rolls, maybe. I don't know. I've never tried it. When this tree here matures next year and I have all the figs, I shall make some fig rolls. But then, if I wasn't doing the figs, and I still haven't really settled on where I'm going, I have a special affinity for Philip, for obvious reasons. One being that he was clearly the greatest of the disciples, and secondly being that it's obviously my name. So I had a little look up for for Philip there, and I'm disappointed by the images of Philip that are around on the internet. My future looks bleak when you look at some of these. Although on the Rachel clean shaven icon catalogue, Philip comes out fresh faced and big haired, which again spells hope maybe for me. I wonder whether I might have a go at again a different kind of a service that followed the life of Philip. But the problem with Philip is there's more written about like extra biblical stuff about Philip than there is like in biblical stuff about Philip, and it's a very series of very short encounters. But I do like the idea that Philip just introduces people to Jesus. Just introduce, that's his job. That's all I've got to do. I'll just get people there, Jesus to do the rest. And I really think that's just really quite a powerful message. When our congregations, I sometimes think when we talk about mission and evangelism and stuff, think they've got to like drag people over the line into the kingdom of God, when actually Philip seems to be suggesting, no, just introduce people. God, God will do the rest. Jesus can do his own stuff. There's quite a stirring image of Philip stamping on this horned, scaly beast, which I quite like. I'm not quite sure where that comes from because it's not in the Bible, I don't think. But yeah, so he's quite dynamic. And I've forgotten, there's apparently 2 more slides to come here, but I don't know where they are. Oh, they're blank ones, so that's the end of that. Apart from the fig rolls, I'm coming up with anything that's actually really visual or dynamic in worship, except the vague idea, which is still a very vague idea, of somehow rigging up cameras around the sanctuary, or if you're on Zoom, putting on the recording button unexpectedly and seeing how people respond to the idea that they're being watched. And one of my previous churches, we set up a dummy CCTV camera pointing straight at the door with a flashy light on it, and people thought it was, so when there were incidents, members would come to me and say, can we have a look at the CCTV footage? And I'd say, oh, unfortunately, I didn't catch that particular moment because it was a dummy. Yes, listen.
I was thinking you could actually talk about the Zoom way of worshipping, because you do get to know a bit more about people's houses and how they live. We know that Phil has an unmade bed in the room that he has in the study, except now it's cunningly disguised, or what sort of art people like, or that their bookshelves need a bit of tidying up and it's a bit of distraction looking what's behind them. So we have actually, by worshipping with cameras, you get a bit more of an insight into people's lives that we wouldn't have had before. And it's interesting who reveals what about themselves online in a different way. So I have terrible shadows under my eyes, which are looking quite bad now, but they're covered up because I cannot cope with seeing my haggard expression on. And what does that say? That I don't like to show my whole self. I like to pretend a bit when I know that I'm being watched. And there may be stuff about Zoom or whatever we're using, that because we get to see not just the person but where they are in the house, there may be something in that going on from what you said, Phil.
Okay, so yeah, some visual ideas surrounding various themes. Ruth,
Just to add to that visual idea, well, when we have shared screens here, I feel a bit of a relax of, I know we're still visible a little bit down the side, but we're not as visible because our focus is on something else, and that feels good. So you could do some of that with a Zoom congregation, and you could have some images of God or images of creation, and just make the point that when our focus is elsewhere, we're less self-conscious about ourselves, and the shoulders drop and we feel better. And maybe there's something there about Psalm 139 of saying, you know, God is looking on us kindly and lovingly, and if we can in worship make sure our focus is on God, it soothes away some of that sense of how are we looking, how are we acting, you know, of a feeling. It's the opposite of feeling judged, and it's a kind of, as I used to say to my Ellie when she was little, oh look, a distraction. You know, it's that kind of, it's just helping us to inhabit the idea that being known by God is a good thing and not a bad thing. But maybe we could use Zoom to somehow kind of illustrate that, and sharing of screen kind of takes a bit of the pressure off.
Yeah, I think I might want to try and imagine some examples of the way that we are watched in a supportive way. It's like parents watching their kids at a playground, isn't it? Or like a lifeguard watching a beach full of people. There are different scenarios where we're more comfortable with being watched than not. And sometimes people ask for CCTV, don't they, when they feel threatened by crime, but they're asking for other people to be watched, which is a slightly different kind of a concept. So yeah, there might be some mileage in that. I don't know, this whole idea of being watched and Psalm 139 and whether how it makes us feel. Okay, so has anyone got anything to add before we wrap this up? Nope, we have been talking absolute worship for just under an hour, I think. We hope that you are blessed as you wrestle with these words from the Bible and try to bring what God is saying in a clear focus for your congregations. And as we leave you, we want to pray with you, and Ruth is going to pray for us.
Let us pray. All-seeing God, as you look on us with love, we ask you also to inspire us with a sense of being at home with you in your world and in your church. Help us to point to your love, to bring people to Jesus, to be open to your Spirit. So through our worship of you and our leading of others, may your love be known and enjoyed, and may your love fill the world you have made to your praise and glory. Amen.
Amen.